Hi, my name's Ryan. I'm a digital marketing exec at Zengenti, but I'm a writer at heart. I've always loved words, telling stories. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a war correspondent, but it turns out I'm too much of a coward to do that, so I got into marketing instead. At Zengenti, I write a lot of our content, our long-form content, blogs, website content. I work closely with Gabriel and Zach, who are our content strategists. Some of you might have met Zach before. He compared Rocket last year and the year before that. And we deliver writing for the web workshops together. Today, I'm going to be talking about style guides. So using style guides and some of the new features in Contensis 9 to reinforce your style guide and create better content. Strong and consistent content is made up of three key ingredients. You've got voice, tone, and style. To a certain extent, voice dictates tone, and then tone influences your style as well. I'll talk more about those in a minute. For those of you who haven't seen it, this is the new content entry screen in Contensis 9. So it breaks your content down into small chunks, which are not only easier to reuse, but they're easier for editors to fill in and create content as well. So you can kind of create a form that's like a step-by-step guide to creating a piece of content that you use often, a content type. You can add placeholder text like this to give tips to editors on what they should be putting into that field. And you can add these little content guidelines to reinforce your voice, tone, or style. We'll take a look at that later on. So we'll start off by looking at what a style guide is. Can I just get a show of hands on people who've got a style guide in their organisation that they know of? That's a lot of people. And how many people adhere to it religiously, or know where it is, where they can find it? That's a few less people. Okay, so we'll just go through looking at what a style guide is traditionally, how they're changing with the web, and why it's important to adhere to it. So a style guide is a set of standards for creating content for a particular publication or organisation. So everybody from councils to universities to newspapers will have a style guide that sets out how you should write for all of their written material. I really like this quote from The Guardian. I think it's from Aristotle originally. So, style to be good must be clear. Clearness is secured by using words that are current and ordinary. So if you get an in-depth style guide like The Guardian or The Economist, they'll have really long lists of words that you should avoid or words that are commonly misused, and they do that to ensure clarity more than anything else. This is one of the most popular style guides for journalists, the AP style book, so most American newspapers adhere to that. It's very widely used in that industry. Other ones you might have heard of are the Chicago Manual of Style, which is another common American one. These are the really old school kind of newspaper ones that really go into detail on, like I said, which words to use, which words to avoid, words that are commonly misused as well. But we're starting to see a shift now to this kind of thing that MailChimp have created. So this is an open website, anybody can visit it. I'd encourage you to take a look, it's really, really good. And it incorporates not only style, so the traditional things that we think about when we think of style, so word choice, grammar, punctuation, but also voice and tone, which traditionally were kept in a separate document, maybe in the branding guidelines, so not everybody would have access to those. But the way that publishing online has kind of devolved throughout organisations with blogging and departments creating their own content. But this is fantastic because you've got one place you can go to. Anybody in the organisation can get there. They can read about the brand's overall voice, and they can get advice on what tone to use in different situations. So you can see writing blog posts, technical content, legal content. MailChimp give their users advice on what tone to adopt for all of those different purposes. There's a good line in there explaining that they break a number of grammar rules for clarity, practicality, or preference. So you might be working for an organisation and there's a way you were taught to write at school, a certain style you were taught to adopt, but the organisation might not want to use that because that might not be the easiest way to communicate online. There might be easier ways to get your points across without adhering to sort of strict Victorian grammar. If you work in a government institution, a local government, then the gov.uk style guide is fantastic. They've done a lot of work on usability, readability, accessibility, and they've incorporated all that into their style guide. And there's tips on government jargon, what you should use, and how to style certain terms that you probably use a lot more often than the rest of us. So why do you need a style guide? Well, for one thing, it makes sure everybody sticks to your branding, your way of writing, creating content that's recognisable and familiar wherever your audience finds it. So whether they're reading your blog or like a guest blog on another website or a piece of content on your website, it's going to have your voice and it's going to be instantly recognisable. It gives new team members, freelancers, or people from outside your organisation writing content for you a sort of head start on how to write content that fits your brand. So when you've got that blank piece of paper, you haven't got that thought process on, right, how do I do this? What kind of voice do I use? How does this organisation speak? That kind of thing. They can just get on with writing the piece of content. And it does the same thing for colleagues that aren't very confident with writing. So you might have somebody in your organisation that doesn't write content very often, and they're suddenly tasked with writing a web page or a blog, and they're thinking, I don't know how to do this. I haven't written anything since I was at school. And that advice on voice, tone, and style just can clear up any ambiguity, any worries they might have about making their writing fit in with your style. And it saves time and money by cutting down on the number of times you have to go back to somebody and say, sorry, this isn't in with our voice or our branding guidelines. That's not how we use commas. You need to put an Oxford comma in, or we don't use dashes like that. Use em dashes. You just don't need to keep going back and forth with that kind of thing. People have got it set out originally. They can go there and see exactly how you do it. Similarly, resolve arguments about stylistic issues. Common things are like job titles. So job titles shouldn't actually be capitalised. A lot of organisations do capitalise them to appease people, essentially. So your boss will come back to you and be like, my job doesn't look important, it's all lowercase, why have you done that? And it's no good saying, oh, well, yeah, technically it's not supposed to be like that. But if you can point to the branding guidelines, you've at least got a chance to argue your point. You're probably going to have to find a compromise, but at least you've got that backup. And it provides a standard by which to measure your content. So are you familiar with writing a definition of done for a task? So if you're working in an agile way, you'll provide a definition by which you can go back to it once you've completed a task or feature you're developing, and you can say, right, this passes because it does what it says in that definition of done. And your branding guidelines can serve a similar purpose. You can look back at them and you can say, right, fits our voice, the tone is appropriate for the situation, and there are no style issues. So as long as the content's good, then it's fine to be published. Okay, so as I mentioned before, traditionally most organisations would have a separate style guide and branding guidelines, but that's changing, making it a lot easier for people to find all the information they need to create content in one place. And it's also easier if you're a content strategist or head of a comms team to keep everything up to date and current. You've just got one document to do everything in. So things like voice are starting to be incorporated into style guides. So your voice is it's the personality of your brand. It's similar to the way that two newspapers can cover the same story with two very different headlines. So you'll get a news event and The Sun or another tabloid will cover it with one headline, probably something catchy and bombastic, and then somebody like The Times, it will be far more understated. Those are two different voices appealing to two different audiences. Voice helps establish a relationship with your audience in the same way that those newspapers use it. So Sun readers expect that over-the-top headline, whereas readers of The Times would maybe find that a bit distasteful or unpleasant or whatever. It's just not what they want. A good voice can help people to trust you. They come to know what to expect from you, and they feel that they know you. It's largely dictated by what you want to communicate about your brand, but it also is in turn affected by what your audience expects and who they are. So the more diverse your audience, the more like different kinds of people that make up your audience, the more you should aim for clarity in your content. You're trying to reach a lot of people, so you need to make things very, very clear. If you've got a very niche audience, maybe like, I don't know, say a tech magazine or something, those people are going to expect a certain amount of jargon and like in-jokes and things like that. When you're coming up with a voice for your organisation, it helps to think of them as a person and think how they'd speak, what would they say. In the same way that we all have a voice, our voice stays the same. It might change over time, but it changes very slowly. It can help when you're defining your voice to think about what it is and what it isn't. So you could be helpful but non-intrusive, so you're not annoying. Proud but not arrogant, because nobody likes arrogance. And friendly but not chummy. So people know how far to push things. So somebody's reading your style guide, they're going through the section on voice. They know, okay, I want to be helpful, but I don't want to get in people's way. I don't want to be annoying. And I'm proud of what our company do, but I'm not so arrogant that I don't see its shortcomings, that kind of thing. And while your voice stays the same or changes very slowly, things like tone depend on the situation you're in. Just quickly with this one, because I'm very conscious of time, but if you look at this and try and ignore the photos to a certain extent, focus on the text, 150 years and counting, our story, become a friend of Jack, join our mailing list. What kind of things come to mind? What kind of personality would you give Jack Daniels? Probably influenced by your impression of the brand as well, because you might have come across their marketing material before, but anybody want to volunteer some words? Loyal? Okay. Traditional. Yeah, definitely. Longevity.
We're doing this for a long time, we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Personable.
Yeah. Sorry?
Personable.
Personable. Yeah. What? Because of the become a friend.
JD.
Yeah. I was thinking, so words like heritage, long established, historic, amiable, and like this kind of, it's almost like inviting you to become a drinking buddy, which is maybe not that responsible, but like it really works. I really like Jack Daniels.
Disclaimer at the bottom of the website.
Yeah, I think they had one before you got in. Yeah, but yeah, I really like Jack Daniels branding. I'm not so keen on the flavour, but I think they do a really good job of that. Okay. So, I think we'll skip this one because I'm running a bit short on time and I want to get through things. So tone, as I mentioned, tone will change depending on the situation you're in. So it's kind of the attitude or mood of a piece of writing. So my voice at the moment is pretty much the same as it always is, but my tone is a lot different than if I was down the pub with my mates or relaxing in my front room or something. It depends a lot on the emotional state of the people that you're talking to. So if somebody's in a certain situation, you're going to address them in a tone that's appropriate to that. So if somebody's annoyed, you're probably not going to make too many jokes. And and if somebody's stressed or bereaved or something, you're going to try and come across as compassionate and straightforward as well, because things like cognitive load, so the amount of stress that people are under and what they're thinking about, can affect how easily they understand things. So cognitive load is a little bit like RAM in a computer. You've only got a certain amount, and while you're processing information and tasks, you don't have a lot spare to comprehend content, essentially. So things like user journeys, user stories, and identifying top tasks can help you create a tone that's really appropriate to the situation you're in, especially with your website. So you might have an error page, like I'll show you in a moment, and you know that you don't want to annoy people there. That's not an appropriate place to be making jokes. So you'll plan that out, and then you could even A/B test two separate forms, or you could do some user testing and see how people react, get them to feedback on their impression of your brand after they've filled in that form. So we've got this one from Slack, whose branding and content's fantastic. So this is quite early on in the user journey. This is, I'm pretty sure this might be their homepage. And I've just entered the wrong email address on purpose. And it says, oops, you got an invalid email address. Well, they can get away with that jokiness, that banter, because it's a very simple form. It's not like I've entered loads of content or to text that I'm then going to have to go back and re-enter or correct. And it also helps to immediately convey the kind of feeling of the company before I've interacted with them too much. If that was an error on a customer service form or a billing form, I wouldn't really be in the mood for jokes. I just want them to tell me what was wrong and let me correct it so I can get on with it. But there, it works, and it really establishes that relationship with the company, I think. Especially with Slack, actually, because their product's very simple, and the idea of it's been around for a very long time. It's a messaging service for companies. But what they've done is they've packaged it and branded it in a really clever way that's made it really attractive to developers and creative teams. So style is the kind of essence of your traditional style guide. It's the technical bits of your writing. It's the way you use words. It's which words you use, the way you spell them, how you use grammar and punctuation. It's the nitty-gritty stuff that people often disagree about. So like I was saying, job titles, things like that, how you write dates, what you capitalize, what you don't capitalize, how you capitalize titles, things like that. As I mentioned, the more comprehensive style guides, like the ones issued by newspapers, will actually list very commonly misused words, because people mishear things and they begin using words in the wrong way over time. But I think for organisations, it's more important to set out the things, the jargon internally that you don't want to use when speaking to your users, because you're going to confuse them, and to set out ways of writing. So a lot of you will use pronouns like you and we instead of saying user or organisation. Because for one thing, it's easier to read, but it's also a lot friendlier. It creates a nicer dynamic in your writing. And in that way, it's linked to your voice and tone. So a kind of sensible middle ground between serious and friendly would be that kind of use of pronouns, things like that. Okay, I'm going to skip this just because I am short on time. But these slides will be shared afterwards. If you want to have a go at these, then feel free. So let's take a look at how the new content types and entries in Contensis 9 can help you reinforce these guidelines and provide some help to your users, your editors, when they're creating content. Okay, so this is a content type that I created for a Zengenti blog post. And I want to put in a field for a social media title that will appear on Facebook Instant Articles or Twitter cards when people share the blog. So if you click share, and it creates a pre-populated tweet that you can share to your followers. And then our developers will use that field to populate that Twitter card or whatever. I've given it the name social media title, and this default value is content that will be published if the editor doesn't complete that field. And I don't want to fill that in because it's really important that that title is unique on social media, otherwise nobody's going to click it. It needs to be something interesting and specific to that post. But if you were setting something else in that field, so if that field was like a location where the blogger was based, then, and most of your offices were in London or something, you might fill that in as London, and then every time a blog is published, it'll set that default value unless somebody overrides it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that blank because I don't want people to ignore it. And I'm also going to set this validation setting to make sure that this field is populated by the author, because I don't want a Twitter card going out looking all wonky because it's got no title in it. So I'll turn that on, and then I'll get the option to set a validation message. So there I'm going to tell people why they need to fill that in and where it's going to be used, because that's going to help them to create some appropriate content for that field. I also want to make sure that people don't make the title too long, because it'll get truncated, it'll look terrible, won't make any sense. And you can have up to around 50 characters, I think, in a Twitter card. So I've set that at 50 characters. And I've put another validation message to make sure that people know why that's not being accepted if it's too long, and how long they should make it. I'm not going to use it here, but it's also a pattern matching feature. So commonly used formats like email addresses, website addresses, you can use something called regular expressions to check those. So you could use one of the existing ones, so there's email address, website address, postcodes, and title casing there. But you could also get your developers to create a custom one for you to check a regularly used kind of content, make sure it matches the right format. And as well as those validation settings, the content type creator also lets you choose a field editor and content guidelines and the placeholder text. So on this occasion, I just want a single line of text because it's a title, so I'm going to leave it at text. But you can also select multi-line in this specific text field. And the content guidelines, I'm going to put some advice based on our tone for social media. So our style guide says that we should always aim to delight and educate our followers, so people know that they've got to put something in there that's interesting and informative, and they should use a tone that's appropriate to that. And that will appear when they come to create an entry just below the box there. So they'll get that little bit of dialogue telling them, giving them a hint what the way they should write that. And I'm also going to fill in the placeholder text, so they get a hint as soon as they start completing that field. They get some advice on what to put in there. So social media title, if I'm a blogger filling that in, I might not know what that means, but I've got a little hint there before I start entering text to say that that's the title that's going to be displayed when somebody shares the blog on social media. So it's not really a style thing. It's more to do with being helpful and speeding up that content creation process, removing any doubt and confusion. And that's it. In terms of where to go from here, I'd say decide on a voice for your organisation if you haven't already, but it sounds like a lot of you have got branding guidelines and style guides, that kind of thing. If you haven't got a style guide, I'd start by looking out there for one that's readily available and suitable for your organisation. So councils, gov.uk is a good place to start. The MailChimp one's good to look at if you're not local government. And there are quite a few other ones out there as well that you can maybe incorporate into your branding documentation. And then breaking your content down into smaller chunks to make it easier to create and allowing you to reinforce that style and help people create better content. And that's it. I think we've finished just about on time. All right, thanks.